Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Landing of the Pilgrims by James Daugherty. Narrated by Todd Mclaren. Part 1. Not as Other Men, 1607 through 1620. The Boy and the Postmaster, 1607. The blast of the courier's horn sounded gaily across the fields. The post-riders were nearing the town of Scrooby on the Great North Road from London. The dogs barked, and children ran out shouting. A few villagers hurried toward the big house called the Manor. All were eager to see the post-riders change horses in the Manor courtyard. Young Will Bradford heard the noise and broke into a run. If he hurried now, he would be just in time to see the riders gallop in. As Will came panting into the courtyard, the stable boys led out the two fresh horses. The animals were saddled and all ready to be mounted by the post-riders, who were about to arrive. In a few moments the horn sounded again. The two riders came pounding over the drawbridge on their lathering horses, and through the gate to the Manor courtyard. The post-rider in his high boots and scarlet coat leaped from his horse and quickly unstrapped the two leather mail-bags. At that moment William Brewster, the postmaster of Scrooby, came down the stone steps of the Manor to receive the mail. While Brewster entered the contents of the post-bags in his books of registry, the post-rider and his bugler were guzzling their dinner of cold mutton and beer. In 15 minutes they must be riding their fresh mounts north on the road toward York. Having finished the meal, they swung into the saddle and were off. The gay notes of the postman's horn faded sweetly into the distance. The village again settled back into the drowsy dullness of a long afternoon. Not so William Brewster, who, with his many duties, found little time for idleness. Brewster, as postmaster at Scrooby, was the great man of the countryside. He was steward of the manor, and collected the rents from the tenants of the wide domain of the Archbishop of York. He was the administrator of law and justice for the district. A man of learning, Brewster had attended Cambridge in his youth, where he had studied Greek and Latin. Later, in the service of Queen Elizabeth, he had accompanied one of her ambassadors on an important mission to the Low Countries. He had seen the great world, yet he had come back to this remote corner of England to be postmaster at Scrooby, where his father had held the same office. Although Brewster had moved among the great ones of his day, he was neither proud nor vain. He was respected by his neighbors for his wisdom and godliness. When a neighbor was sick or in trouble and needed the help of a friend, he knew that he could find it at the hands of the postmaster of Scrooby Manor. No one had felt the warmth of Master Brewster's kindness more than young Will Bradford, who looked to him almost as a father. When the boy had been left an orphan and was long ill, Master Brewster had often traveled the 2 miles from Scrooby to Austerfield to visit him and bring presents. As young Will slowly recovered, his friend had helped him in his studies and had given him a copy of the Bible printed in English at Geneva. This Geneva Bible was still a new and rare book in that part of England. Will spent happy hours absorbed in its wondrous pages. He and the postmaster often talked together of its beauty and meaning. In hours of loneliness and pain, the book had brought the boy a marvelous comfort and peace. Later, when Will had visited Master Brewster at the Manor, he had heard him tell brave tales of the great world of London and of the brilliant court of Queen Bess. The lad thrilled to hear the story of how, in 1588, the year before he was born, the terrible armada of King Philip, with all the might of Spain, had sailed against England, and of how Sir Francis Drake and his fearless sea dogs had sallied forth against the great array. Will felt as if he himself had been upon the English decks in all the flame and thunder of the fierce encounter. In the night, Drake had loosed the terrible fire ships blazing among the Spanish fleet. Cutting their cables, the Spaniards had put to sea, and a great wind had blown them toward the coast of Holland. There, the English gunners hammered the enemy to pieces as the great hulks of Spain's proudest ships went up in smoke and flame. In his imagination, young Will pictured himself as a sea captain capturing treasure ships on the Spanish Main. "When I become a man," he thought, "I shall sail a ship across the wide ocean sea and go adventuring in wild America." Now he was in his teens and had never even seen the sea, although the coast was but 50 miles from where he lived. Perhaps he would never see it, for his uncles planned, very sensibly, that he should be a farmer and cultivate the goodly lands his father had left him. How Will made a great decision. For some time Will had heard people talking about a preacher at Babsworth who spoke of the Bible with great power. Because Will read and loved the Bible, he decided to hear this man. It was a 20-mile walk to Babsworth and back, but Mr. Richard Clifton's preaching was worth all the trouble. After that first trip, Will often walked there to hear Mr. Clifton read and expound the Scriptures. The boy seldom missed a Sunday, even if his uncles did not approve of reformist preachers. Later, Master Brewster asked Clifton to preach on Sundays in the great hall at Scrooby Manor. The postmaster invited friends and neighbors to come and hear Mr. Clifton preach. It was not long before many people began attending regularly every Sunday. Folks said Mr. Clifton's discourses woke them up to understand the Scriptures. They came away from these meetings happy and comforted. They began to read and to study their Bible, and to try and practice its teachings in their daily lives. Master Brewster explained that in this simple way the first Christian churches began in ancient times. Within a year, the congregation at Scrooby Manor decided to form a church of their own. It was to be entirely separate from the state church of England, and would have no bishops or ceremonies. For this reason, they would call themselves Separatists. They would also separate themselves from the Puritans, who wanted to reform the Church of England, but not to separate from it. How persecution came upon the Separatists at Scrooby. When young William Bradford announced to his friends that he would leave the church in which he had been baptized and join the Separatists, people were shocked. His uncles pointed out that he would certainly come to a bad end. Already men had been hanged for holding on to such ideas. Friends and relatives argued, pleaded, threatened, warned, but to no purpose. He calmly replied, "To keep a good conscience and walk in such way as God had prescribed in His Word is a thing which I must prefer before you all, and above life itself. Wherefore, since it is for a good cause that I am likely to suffer the disasters which you lay before me, you have no cause to be either angry with me or sorry for me. Yea, I am not only willing to part with everything that is dear to me in this world for this cause, but I am thankful that God hath given me heart so to do, and will accept me so to suffer for him." Plainly the boy was mad. Spies and informers began to watch the homes and to dog the steps of the members of the Separatist Church. The congregation now met secretly at different times and places. One member was arrested and tried by the Archbishop's court at York. He was imprisoned and then released. 5 more members, including Master Brewster, were summoned to appear before the court. William did not need to seek abroad for adventure. Danger waited for him around every corner. It was becoming clear to the Separatists that there could be no freedom for their religion in England. They must shake off the dust of the corrupt land and seek for freedom of pure religion elsewhere. Already one congregation of Protestants had gone to Holland. Master Brewster said that it was a land where there was perfect freedom of religion, as he had seen in his travels. The Scrooby Separatists decided to go to Holland, as Master Brewster had advised. However, they knew that no one could leave England or take out goods and money without permission from the government. This meant that they would have to flee secretly, like criminals. It was a hard and cruel thing to leave one's home and country in this way and seek a living in a strange land. Mr. Brewster and the few who owned land sold their possessions. Secretly, arrangements were made with a Dutch ship captain to meet them at the coast and carry them to Amsterdam. There would be no farewells to their neighbors, for their leaving must be kept as quiet as possible. The women, with their few belongings, would float in a barge to the coast. The men would walk across country, a distance of 50 miles, to the meeting place. Departure, 1608. The first streak of dawn was breaking on the horizon. A chill east wind blew across the marshes near the coast. The women in the barge were seasick from the rough voyage they had made to the meeting place. They were worried, too, for neither the Dutch ship nor their own men had arrived. Their craft had put into an inlet to be sheltered from the rough sea, but now the tide was going out. Soon the water in the inlet was so low that the barge was left stranded on a sandbar. Not until noon would the tide rise enough to float them off. As the sky brightened, the women heard familiar voices calling. Their men had come at last. The walk across country to the coast had taken them 2 days. It was light now, and the men from Scrooby could see the Dutch ship offshore. They could start boarding the ship at once, but the women and children would have to wait until noon, when the rising tide would free their barge. The Dutch ship's boat came ashore to take on passengers. She returned to the ship with the first boatload of men. Among them was William Bradford, now a young man of 19 years. Suddenly, those still on shore heard shouting and excited cries from the ship. As they looked out to sea, she began putting up her sails. Now she was hauling up her anchors. Slowly, the huge sails filled. The ship was putting out to sea. On shore, women screamed and men shouted wildly. They had been abandoned, left on shore while the rest of their party sailed off to Holland. It was a heartbreaking end to their hopes and plans. Those who were left behind could now see a band of men coming toward them across the marshes, with light glinting from their armor and pikes. It had been foolish to suppose that 100 people marching across country for 50 miles would not be seen by the spies and informers. There was time for most of the men ashore to escape. A few at Brewster's command remained with the women. The king's soldiers marched the unhappy group of deserted men, women, and children back to the nearest town. The magistrates were at a loss over what to do with them. There was no charge that could really be brought against the women, as they had only followed their husbands. To send the women and children to jail would merely arouse sympathy for the Separatists. They could not be sent home because all their homes had been sold. As friends were found who would give them temporary shelter, they were released. The whole countryside had heard of their misfortune and of their courage in the face of persecution. It increased the people's sympathy for the Separatists. In the meantime, The unhappy Englishmen aboard the Dutch ship were bound for Holland. They had neither money nor clothes, and they were miserably anxious for their wives and children left behind. They knew that the captain had had to hasten his departure because of the oncoming soldiers, but this knowledge was of small comfort to them. Bradford was at last on the ocean, but it was very different from his boyhood dreams. For a week the ship ran before a lashing gale. At times it seemed that she would surely sink. When the weather cleared, they had been blown to the coast of Norway. When they finally arrived at Amsterdam, they found that the ship had been given up as lost. People said that their survival was a miracle. On landing, William Bradford was promptly arrested. The agent of the King of England had told the Dutch government that Bradford was an escaped criminal. In a few days he was able to prove that he was a religious refugee. Immediately he was freed and welcomed by the English Protestant exiles who were then living in Holland. By degrees, the rest of the refugees arrived in small groups from England, until the entire Scrooby congregation was again united in this foreign land. The last to come was Master Brewster. He had been jailed, and when released, had aided the remaining families to find passage to Holland. For the first time, these English country folk were in a big city. They gawked with wide eyes at the well-dressed crowds, the soldiers posted at the gates and walls, the crowded docks, the overflowing markets, and the rows of handsome dwellings. Best of all, they had at last found freedom to worship God as they chose. They openly attended church on Sundays without fear of spies. Soon they joined the Reformed English Church, already established in Amsterdam, and set about finding ways to make their living in the trades and industries of the busy city. Master Brewster now became unhappily aware of a new threat to their religion, a threat that was even more dangerous than persecution. It did not take the one-time postmaster of Scrooby long to discover that the Amsterdam church was divided with controversy and personal quarrels. There were accusations, slander, and backbiting everywhere among the members. This, Master Brewster thought, was not living the Christian teachings of the Bible. To escape becoming entangled in these mean quarrels and feuds, the Scrooby separatists decided to move on again. As pilgrims, they would journey to the city of Leyden. This city attracted them because it was famous throughout the world for its university and its brave resistance to the Spaniards. When the Scrooby folk were ready to make this second move, they had a grave disappointment. At the last moment, their pastor, Richard Clifton, refused to leave the Amsterdam church. They chose their beloved teacher, John Robinson, to be their pastor in his stead. The Leyden years, 1608 through 1620. They made the pleasant 24-mile journey from Amsterdam to Leyden by canal boat, passing through level land that stretched like a garden to the horizon. In the distance, church spires rose, and everywhere were windmills with their great sails turning in the fresh sea wind. At the city gate of Leyden, the guard examined their papers. Then the newcomers passed under the deep arch into the ancient city, which was to be their home. Leyden was called, by the many who loved her, the fairest and most civilized city in the world. It was a prosperous city, too, and there the strangers soon found employment as weavers, hatters, printers, carpenters, and craftsmen, in a dozen other trades. Their pay was usually small and their hours long, but in time they were able to buy a large house for their pastor in Bell Alley near the cathedral. A plot of land was purchased, and houses for the church members were built around a quiet court. This colony became a peaceful bit of England planted in a corner of the friendly Dutch city. Here they welcomed other English refugees to the freedom and peace of their new home, and the congregation grew in number and strengthened in faith. Their wise and loving pastor, John Robinson, became a father to them, and his congregation grew in grace and mutual love. Elder Brewster taught English in the university. It was a popular course, and he was able to provide comfortably for his wife and 3 children. Young Bradford became a maker of corduroy. As he prospered, he courted and married Daugherty May of Wisbeach, England. Their wedding took place at the Leiden City Hall. According to the Separatists, marriage was performed by the magistrates and not by the church. Soon, Bradford could speak Dutch like a Hollander, and French like, well, he could manage it somehow. He became a good Latin and Greek scholar and loved to study Hebrew with the hope that someday he would be able to read the Bible in the original tongue. He made many friends among the hospitable Hollanders and became a Dutch citizen. On peaceful Sundays, Bradford and the other English exiles walked along brick-paved streets under the delicate linden trees that bordered the quiet Razenboots Canal. They marveled at the great cathedral and the handsome Stadhuis. Prosperous Dutch burghers and their wives strolled by dressed in silks and fine linens. Sometimes, through open doorways, the Scrooby folk caught glimpses of richly furnished rooms, where a silk-clad girl strummed a mandolin. On the floors were rich Turkish carpets, and on the walls were hangings, engraved maps, or pictures of calm merchants in sober black. Dutch kitchens gleamed with pots and pans of polished copper, and tables were piled with fruit from the market stalls along the Rhine. One Sunday afternoon, Bradford stopped before a bookshop window to study curious prints picturing the customs of the natives of Florida and Virginia. The pictures were in a book of voyages newly published by the engraver Théodore de Brie. Every one of the exiles found something to love in this friendly city, and to the English boys and girls it soon became home. They learned to sing and dance at the rollicking Dutch Kermis, or Harvest Festival. In winter they strapped on their curved wooden skates and flew over the ice outside the city walls. The press. No one knew better than the scholarly Brewster the power of the printed word to influence the minds of men. He had long dreamed of a printing press to spread the true religion as the Separatists saw it. In England, presses must be licensed, and all printing was censored by the king and the bishop. When Elder Brewster became used to the free air of Leiden, he realized that this was the place to start his press. For it, his friend, Mr. Brewer, provided the money. Soon, Separatists' tracts and pamphlets from Brewster's press were being smuggled into England and secretly circulated. King James was especially annoyed at 2 pamphlets that denounced the Perth Assembly. At this assembly of Scottish clergymen, the king had attempted to compel them to conform to the Church of England and its practices. It was known that these books were being smuggled in from Holland, and the king's spies were searching Amsterdam and Leiden for the secret press, and particularly for the person of Mr. Brewster. The will of King James was almost as powerful in Holland as in England, for English troops had long fought in the lowlands, for a price, aiding the Dutch against the Spanish. Because of this, it was not long before the authorities at Leiden quietly closed down Mr. Brewster's printing press. But Mr. Brewster himself was nowhere to be found. The truth is that he was on a secret mission to his old home in Scrooby. There, he was discussing with his old friend and landlord, Sir Edwin Sandys, the Separatists' plans to seek a new home. Brewster realized that no time must be lost in seeking another place to live, for Holland's 12-year peace treaty with Spain was drawing to a close. The English exiles at Leiden would soon find themselves in a country torn by war. Furthermore, new problems had appeared. The king's spies were again hounding the separatist leaders, and the separatists' children were growing up, barely remembering old England. Some had married Dutch girls and boys. Others had gone to sea on the Dutch ships that sailed to the distant East Indies. Their sons joined the Dutch army as musketeers and were marching in cutlass and helmet through the streets of Leyden to the sound of drum and trumpet, preparing for war. Few Hollanders had been converted to the separatist church. On the contrary, there was a real danger of the whole English colony becoming slowly absorbed into Dutch life. The separatists treasured and valued their mother tongue and English nationality, second only to their religion. It was becoming plain that the only place where they could still remain Englishmen and keep their freedom of worship was across the ocean in the wilderness of America. William and Dorothy Bradford spoke of these things as they sometimes walked along the ancient walls of Leyden in the quiet evening. "Why can we not stay among our friends in this peaceful city?" urged Dorothy. "Sometime things will change, perhaps, and we can go back to the old home in England. Why should we be forever moving on?" "Things will grow worse in England, not better," William replied, "as the king forces his will upon the people. There will be no more freedom in England. America is the promised land," he went on. "There we can found a new state where freedom-loving men may come. The word of God will be a shining light to all the world. We shall build the new Jerusalem, and the kings of the earth shall bring their glory and honor into it." For the moment, Dorothy was caught in the fervor of his words. She knew that he would go, and that she would go with him. Yet, in her dreams, England would always be calling her back to a peaceful garden and a quiet street, and the spring wind blowing over the flower-strewn meadows. William and Dorothy were not the only people who were divided on the question of going to America. Never had there been such discussion and argument since the English had come to Leyden. Everyone took sides in the matter of leaving Holland for America. Those who were against it spoke of the dangers and great length of the sea voyage, the sufferings from famine and want in the savage wilderness. When it came to the Indian perils, they really let their imaginations go, and described in detail what it felt like to be skinned, broiled, and eaten by the savages. Besides all these unpleasantnesses, it would cost a great deal more than any of them could afford. Bradford replied for those who were determined to go. "All great and honorable actions are accompanied with great difficulties, and must be both enterprised and overcome with answerable courages. It was granted the dangers were great, but not desperate. The difficulties were many, but not invincible. For though there were many of them likely, yet they were not certain. It might be that sundry of the things feared might never befall. Others, by provident care and the use of good means, might in a great measure be prevented, and all of them, through the help of God, by fortitude and patience, might either be borne or overcome." The words glowed with faith and vision, and an unbeatable courage to build a brave, free world. As always before great decisions, there was a day of prayer by the congregation. When the vote was taken according to their democratic custom, the majority were for going to the New World, for moving on, for the great adventure. There were now many more decisions to be made, and much to be done. Just where they should go, and how many of them should go, were serious questions. While the king's agents were looking for him in Holland, Mr. Brewster was in England with his friend Sir Edwin Sandys, urging him to persuade the king to grant them freedom of religion in America. Those in
Sample complete. Ready to continue?